Hey, Class 10. Welcome to a really important explainer that's going to get you totally prepped for your exams. So we're always told democracy is the best, right? But what about the money side of things? Does it actually make countries richer? Let's dive in and find out.
This explainer is brought to you by A1 Institutes. We're here to help you nail those exams and succeed.
All right, so here's our roadmap. First, we'll talk about what we think democracy should do for the economy. Then we'll look at the actual data, the hard numbers. After that, we'll get into the real issue, which is inequality. And that'll lead us to something called the democratic paradox. And don't worry, we'll wrap it all up with a perfect summary for your exam answers.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1. Let's talk about the big promise. We have this idea that a government that's by the people should create prosperity for the people. It just makes sense, right? But is it actually true?
I mean, this is the big question, isn't it? It just feels so logical. A good, accountable government should lead to a strong economy for everyone. But let's see what happens when we put that idea to the test. So now we're moving from just ideas to actual evidence. This is where we get into the nitty-gritty and look at the hard data to see what story the numbers really tell us. And we're not just looking at a couple of years, we're analyzing a huge 50-year period, all the way from 1950 to the year 2000. This study looked at all kinds of governments to see which ones really delivered on economic growth.
So the main showdown is between two types of governments. On one side, we have all the dictatorial regimes, and on the other, all the democratic ones. Let's see how they did.
And boom, here are the numbers. And this might surprise you. Dictatorships actually had a slightly higher growth rate, 4.42%. Democracies were just behind at 3.95%. I know, that's probably not what you were expecting. But here is the most important part of this whole debate. That tiny difference? It's considered negligible. Basically, it's a wash. So what this tells us is that democracy is not some magic button for economic growth, but it also shows that it doesn't fall behind either. So clearly, just looking at growth isn't the whole story.
Okay, so if the overall growth rate is pretty much the same, what are we missing? Well, this brings us to a much, much bigger deal. It's not just about how big the economic pie is. It's about who gets a slice. Let's talk about inequality.
Right. This is where it gets really interesting. When a democracy's economy grows, does that mean life gets better for everybody? Or does all that new wealth just go to a few people at the top? This chart paints a pretty clear picture, doesn't it? You can see that even in democratic countries, a tiny group at the top, the richest 20%, are holding a huge chunk of the national income. And the poorest 20%, they're left with basically crumbs. And this quote puts some truly shocking numbers to that image. Just let that sink in. In some democracies, the top 20% take home over 60% of all the money, while the bottom 20% get less than 3%. The gap is absolutely massive. So, all of this leads us to a really tricky problem, a central puzzle within democracy that we call the democratic paradox. How on earth can a system that's built on the idea of equality end up being so unequal? Well, here's how it breaks down. On one hand, you have political power. In a democracy, that's equal. Every single person gets one vote. But on the other hand, you have economic power, and that is wildly unequal. A very small number of super rich people control a massive amount of the wealth. And this is the paradox in a nutshell. Even though poor people make up a huge chunk of the voting population, the governments they vote for often don't seem that interested in actually fixing poverty. Why? Because that huge economic power the wealthy have, it often gives them way more political influence, making sure that government policies tend to benefit them first.
So what does this mean in the real world, for real people? It means that for millions, even in democracies, the most basic things we all need to live, food, a safe place to live, education for our kids, healthcare, are just completely out of reach.
All right, deep breath. We've covered a lot. Now for the most crucial part. Let's boil this all down into the key points you need to absolutely smash your exam answer. First thing to remember, democracy is not a magic wand for the economy. It doesn't automatically mean a country will get rich quick. Second takeaway, when you look at the data from 1950 to 2000, there's hardly any difference in the growth rates between democracies and dictatorships. It's basically a tie. Third, and this is the big one, the real economic story in democracies isn't about growth, it's about the massive gap between the rich and the poor. Inequality is the key issue. And finally,
The main point of the democratic paradox. Just because everyone gets one vote doesn't mean everyone gets a fair slice of the economic pie. Political equality does not automatically create economic equality.
And there you have it, that argument, moving step by step from growth to inequality to the paradox. That is the core analysis that will get you top marks.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into the economic outcomes of democracy. We've got more explainers that cover other parts of this chapter, so definitely check those out. If this helped you feel more ready for your exams, do us a favor and like, share, and subscribe to the A1 Institute YouTube channel. For admissions, notes, or any guidance, you can always contact A1 Institute. The phone number is right there in the description below. Keep studying hard and good luck.